They called it a routine restructuring. I called it a public burial. The boardroom had changed over the years: sleeker chairs, a more polished projection system, bigger windows overlooking the fog-drenched skyline of San Francisco, but it still smelled faintly of carpet glue and coffee. I remembered the first time I stood here pitching to an empty table armed with nothing but a dream and a demo. Back then, no one took me seriously. And now, they were preparing to erase me altogether. My seat at the head of the table was still warm from my last victory. The confidence I carried in was cooling quickly. Richard cleared his throat. My father didn't speak unless he wanted something. This time, he wanted blood. "I think Daniel should kick things off," he said, gesturing casually toward my brother. I blinked. "Excuse me. It's just a suggestion," Richard replied. "Daniel has some exciting new ideas that align with our long-term vision." Daniel straightened his posture, smoothing a navy blazer that still had the tag threads on the cuff. "Thanks, Dad," he said, as if we were at Thanksgiving dinner instead of a corporate coup. He tapped his iPad, and a sleek presentation appeared on the screen behind him. "I'm excited to introduce NovaFrame," he began. "It's an adaptive AI framework that learns from real-time logistics data to enhance predictive modeling across verticals." My breath caught. NovaFrame was my project, my design. I had written the white paper 6 months ago and had been preparing to present the prototype today. Word for word, slide for slide, this was mine. Daniel's delivery was polished, even confident. He'd always been charming in a trust fund rebel sort of way, but he didn't know what he was talking about. He was parroting my notes. "To be transparent," he continued, "we built upon several ideation documents from our internal think tank, but the implementation is entirely original." The board murmured approval. Chloe, our general counsel, didn't flinch. She'd known. I could see it in the way her eyes avoided mine. "I'd like to propose a formal shift," Richard announced, standing. "Madison has served this company with distinction, and now it's time for her to embrace a more visionary role. As of today, she will move into a senior advisor position. Daniel will take over as interim CEO." The room froze. "A visionary role," I repeated. "Without executive control, exactly," he said, calm and condescending. "You'll be the soul of the company. No need to worry about day-to-day stress." The vote happened before I could process it. 6 hands went up, including Chloe's. Unanimous. Rachel, my assistant, stood motionless by the glass wall. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Cameras flashed in the corridor as Richard stepped up to the press line with Daniel. "Grant Group is entering a new era," he declared. "And Daniel is the right leader for this moment. Young, visionary, grounded in the future." I stood just behind the tinted glass, no longer welcome at my own company's helm. I watched their faces light up under the strobes, of father and son celebration masquerading as progress. My legs carried me back to my office before I realized I had moved. The door still bore my name in brass. Madison Grant, CEO. I stared at it for a long moment before reaching for the screwdriver in my drawer. One slow twist at a time, the screws gave way. I held the nameplate in my palm. It felt heavier than it looked. Inside, I packed only the essentials: my notebook, the encrypted drive, and from the bottom drawer, a velvet box I hadn't opened in years. The phoenix pendant gleamed under the recessed lighting. It was my mother's, a gift passed down through fire and grit. I slipped it around my neck. "They think this is the end, but they don't know what a phoenix really means." Maddie removed the nameplate from her office door. In her hand was the phoenix necklace glinting beneath the cold light. The Italian restaurant was all glass and gloss, too elegant to feel warm, too curated to feel real. I stepped into the private dining room labeled Grant Family with a knot in my stomach. It wasn't hunger. A waiter offered to take my coat. I hesitated before handing it over, as if the lining still held fragments of authority I couldn't afford to lose. Richard was already seated at the head of the table, swirling a glass of Barolo with the familiarity of a man who assumed power belonged to him. Evelyn sat beside him, polished in Pearl's eyes, scanning her phone like she was checking stock prices instead of waiting for her daughter. Daniel was across from her, and beside him Chloe. Her hand rested lightly on Daniel's arm, a claim without words. I paused for a beat too long, unsure whether to sit or turn back. Then I took the seat furthest from my father, like a guest at someone else's family reunion. "So glad you could make it," Richard said, tone neutral, eyes dismissive. Figured after the morning meeting a little regrouping was in order. Regrouping. Like we were a football team reviewing strategy after a loss. Only I was the only one bruised. Evelyn didn't greet me. She adjusted her napkin instead. Her silence was its own kind of punctuation. "I've booked a few weeks at the vineyard in Sonoma," Richard continued. "Thought you could use the time to rest. Recharge." "Rest?" I echoed. "I was supposed to be in Munich next week closing the Thalmann merger. Daniel's handling it now," he said, not looking up from his wine. "He's stepping in smoothly." I turned to Daniel. He gave me a small nod, maybe apologetic. Maybe smug. It was impossible to tell. "Just a temporary shift," Richard added. "But a necessary one. You've been under strain." I looked to Evelyn for some maternal defense. Some flicker of disagreement. She smoothed her napkin again. "Nothing." Chloe raised her glass. "To evolution," she said lightly. "Every company needs it." Her smile was sugar-coated steel. "And what does every family need?" I asked, voice sharp despite my effort. "Balance," Richard said. "And perspective." I pushed my chair back slightly enough to make the tension audible. "And what I need apparently is a vacation in silence." "No one's asking you to disappear," he said. "Just recalibrate." Chloe's hand found Daniel's again. He didn't flinch. "If this is your version of support," I said, "I'll take absence." Evelyn finally looked at me. "Maddie," she said, her voice soft, but not warm. "Sometimes stepping back is strength. I've stepped back my entire life so Daniel could catch up," I replied. Silence. Heavy. Even the waiter avoided our table. Richard leaned in. "You should know when to stop. Women don't need to prove anything when they already have a place." I rose. My chair scraped against the marble. "If that's true, then why do I feel like I've spent my whole life building a place only to be locked out?" No one answered. I turned and left, heels echoing against the cold tile. The air outside hit me like truth, sharp and bracing. As I reached the sidewalk, I heard a voice behind me. Evelyn's. Soft. Unintended for my ears. If she were a little gentler, maybe her father would have trusted her more. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. That sentence was enough to rewrite years of sacrifice. My phone buzzed. A single message. "Are you finally ready? Caleb." They kicked me out of the tower. So I went back to where I built the ground floor. The lock jammed on the third twist. Figures. This place had always resisted easy entry, just like the dream I once nurtured inside it. When the door finally creaked open, the stale air rushed past me like a sigh held for too long. I stepped in slowly, rain clinging to my coat, like the memories clinging to these walls. The Mission District apartment hadn't changed. A layer of dust veiled everything, but the bones were intact, bare bulb lighting, that thrifted couch I swore I'd replace, whiteboard nailed crookedly above the old desk. Even the air had a scent I couldn't name, but never forgot. Burnt espresso, late-night adrenaline, failed builds. I closed the door behind me, locking out a city that had forgotten me in less than a day. The silence inside wasn't peaceful. It throbbed. I dropped my bag beside the desk and pulled open the drawer where I used to keep everything that mattered. Empty. Of course. But above the desk, a single sheet of paper still clung to the board, yellowed edges curled. Neural lattice core integration, confidential. I hadn't seen that handwriting in 2 years. Mine. The version of me that still believed Richard respected innovation, that Daniel understood family, that loyalty could inoculate against betrayal. My phone buzzed once. I ignored it. Instead, I pulled a stool to the board and sat, just sat for minutes or maybe hours. My knees bounced, my hands twitching like they still remembered the coding marathons and pizza bribes. My eyes landed on a corner of the whiteboard where someone, probably me, had written, and then angrily scratched out, "We rise together." I almost laughed. Then I didn't. A knock startled me. 3 short taps, no doorbell. I knew who it was. When I opened the door, Caleb stood there, hood-soaked beard, a little wilder eyes, the same as always, observant, tired kind. He didn't wait for permission. Just walked past me and dropped his laptop bag onto the couch like he'd never left. "I didn't think you'd actually come," I said, my voice rough from disuse. "You called." That was new. We stood in silence for a beat. Then he unzipped the bag and pulled out a slim manila folder. "You remember this?" he asked, holding it like it was nuclear. I took it, peeled it open. My breath caught. Pages of prototype notes, early encryption models, UI sketches with post-it scribbles still clinging to the corners. My designs, ones that never made it past internal review because Richard said they were too visionary for our roadmap. Caleb had saved them. "You kept this. You sent it to me," he said. 2 years ago. Said, "If they ever erase me, make sure this lives." I labeled it the Phoenix File. The name stung in a good way. I grabbed 2 glasses, poured whatever wine remained from the bottle I'd forgotten I stored above the fridge. We clinked without toasting. The sound echoed like defiance. "This isn't about taking Grant down," I said. "It's about building something real, something immune." Caleb raised his glass. "Something they'll never see coming." I wiped the board with my sleeve and picked up a red marker. With deliberate slowness, I wrote one word across the center letters, jagged and pulsing. "Phoenix." We stared at it. Neither of us said anything for a long while, but we didn't need to. The phone lit up again. "Naomi." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You told her?" she asked. I replied. I hit the speaker icon. Naomi's voice came through clear, cutting the stillness like a promise wrapped in steel. "Count me in. But if we do this, we go all the way." The air in Walker and Pine reeked of leather-bound books, stale ambition, and overworn victories. The kind of place where deals weren't negotiated, they were engineered. I'd always thought I'd walk into a firm like this wearing a victory pin on my lapel. Instead, I carried a folder thick with rage strategy and the remnants of everything I used to believe about family. Naomi was already there, her hair in a no-nonsense bun tapping rhythmically on her tablet. "You're early," she said, without looking up. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. I kept dreaming someone else was trademarking my name. She looked up, then smiled faintly. "Today, Maddie, we name ourselves. And this time, no one can take it away." The glass conference room had a panoramic view of downtown San Francisco, but I barely glanced at it. My world now centered on the 15 sheets of legal text in front of me. At the top, in bold, sharp typeface, Phoenix Intelligence, Inc. "Is this poetic justice, or just poetic?" I murmured, pen hovering over the signature line. "Justice," Naomi replied, with a side of poetic. I signed. Somewhere inside me, a version of myself, the one that had built Grant Group from whiteboard scribbles to global projections, wept, not out of grief, but transformation. That Maddie had died on the boardroom floor. This one knew better. Caleb appeared on the video call, sleepy-eyed but grinning. "Is it done?" Naomi turned the laptop so he could see the ink drying. She signed. Caleb raised a mug of coffee in salute. "Then we're officially dangerous." I let myself smile. Just a little. The kind of smile you reserve for enemies who don't know they've made a mistake. Naomi then pulled out the second document, thicker bound with legal brads. IP Independent Certification. We're establishing that all tech developed under Phoenix is distinct, with no line of code copied from Grant. And before you ask, yes, we brought in 2 third-party forensic firms to verify. I skimmed through the executive summary. It was airtight, meticulous, brutal. You understand, Naomi said carefully, once we file this and they receive it, there's no going back. There was never any going back, I said. Not since they handed my legacy to someone who never bled for it. Rachel walked in at that moment, coat still on, breath sharp from the morning wind. I left the badge on Richard's desk, she said, cheeks flushed. Took a photo too. Thought it might amuse you. I reached for her hand. I'm sorry you had to choose. I didn't, she said. I knew where the real future was. The filing went through at 11:16 a.m. At 11:58, we got word the Grant Group's legal team had received the conflict notification on the Phoenix trademark. 4 minutes later, a series of internal Slack messages from their side accidentally hit one of our old shared channels. Pings curses a message from Daniel in all caps. She filed what I almost laughed, but I didn't. Not yet. At 1:03 p.m. my phone rang. Unknown caller. I knew that tone even before I answered. Maddie. Daniel. You actually want war? I wanted respect. I got a demotion. You do the math. I tried to reason with Dad. You stood there while he buried me with a smile. He was quiet. I didn't start this, I said. But I will finish it. Click. By 3:00 p.m. tech blogs were already circling blood in the water. Former Grant CEO launches stealth startup, threatens to eclipse former empire. The headline flickered across my screen like a torch being lit. And for the first time since the restructuring, I felt warmth. Former Grant CEO launches stealth startup, threatens to eclipse former empire. Funny thing about being uninvited, it makes your presence even louder. The Four Seasons lobby buzzed with forced laughter and overpriced wine. Outside, the valet line coiled like a python of luxury vehicles, each one more desperate for attention than the last. I stepped onto the marble floor in a crimson blazer. No name tag, no title, just presence. That was enough. I hadn't been invited. Not officially. But Chloe, ever the creature of Instagram habits, had posted a photo 3 hours earlier. Investor Appreciation Night, Nodge Grant Group. Family built. I zoomed in on the guest list reflected in the wine glass beside her. I didn't need an RSVP. I had history. The elevator hummed as it ascended. My reflection multiplied across mirrored panels, stared back. Chin high, breath, steady fury, quiet. The doors slid open to a sea of silver trays and crystal glasses. The startup world's elite floated between velvet partitions, murmuring buzzwords like disrupt, scale, and visionary. My heels clicked against the floor like a metronome of reckoning. A hush swept the left side of the room, then the right. Faces turned. Some widened in disbelief. Others narrowed into thin smiles masking old debts. At the far end of the hall stood Daniel mid-conversation, flanked by Chloe in a plunging black dress and our father in his signature 3-piece navy. Richard's hand rested on Daniel's shoulder, firm, possessive, and unspoken coronation. Chloe spotted me first. Her lips parted, but no words came. Daniel glanced over, then away, as if I were a ghost he half remembered and hoped to forget. I didn't approach them. I didn't need to. I made my way to the bar, nodding at the pianist who faltered a chord, eyes tracking me like I was an unfamiliar note in his sheet music. Didn't she build your core AI? The voice came from behind Richard. A man in a gray suit, Derek Shue, I realized. One of our earliest backers, the kind who preferred logic to charm. He looked at me, then back at Richard. You said Grant's edge came from proprietary intelligence. Wasn't that her neural architecture? Richard cleared his throat, gripping his wine glass tighter. The company was a team effort. My son has been integral in guiding us forward. I raised my glass in silent salute, sipping without breaking eye contact. Chloe muttered something in Richard's ear. He stiffened. Daniel still wouldn't meet my gaze. Maybe he feared what he'd see the sister he'd buried breathing. The lights dimmed slightly as the MC tapped the mic. Richard stepped forward, confidence rehearsed, smile calcified. We built everything together as a family, he declared. Through every hardship, every pivot, we stood by one another. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not loud, not bitter. Just enough. I set my glass down slow and deliberate and walked to the edge of the nearest table. A napkin caught beneath my heel, but I didn't stop. At the microphone's edge, I paused. He turned toward me just slightly, but I was already walking away. Behind me, my fingers brushed the mic switch. It clicked. Live. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Families don't erase their own. The silence cracked like thunder. I exited before the applause or the gasps or the shifting alliances. Let them deal with the echo. My phone buzzed. One message. Still believe in you. Coffee next week. The storm outside was unapologetic. Rain slammed against the window panes like it wanted in thunder, cracking open the silence at irregular intervals. Inside Naomi's apartment, it was all flicker and hum, 6 monitors glowing in sync drives, whirring like whispered promises. I sat with Caleb and Naomi on either side of me, the screens lighting up our faces like some digital seance. Rachel curled up on the far end of the couch with her laptop, had her hair tied back in a messy knot. Eyes laser-locked on a spreadsheet she refused to close. This wasn't just a late-night work session. It was excavation. Caleb leaned forward and tapped a few keys. This drive came from my home server. I cloned the Grant AI platform repo back in 21. Figured one day you might need receipts. He turned a smirk cutting through his beard. Turns out I'm more paranoid than Richard. The directories spilled across the screen like unspooled tape. Layers of archived commits, internal memos, project notes, all dated, indexed, untouched since the day they locked me out. My breath caught as I clicked into a folder labeled Heirloom Chuck Stack Tunt MV4. There it was. My code. My comments. My damn name in every build note. We weren't just building Phoenix anymore. We were arming it. Naomi cracked her knuckles and pulled up the version logs. If they used your modules, we'll catch them in the timestamps. They can rewrite commit notes, but they can't rewrite time. I nodded. Check Delta versions post-June 2022. That's when they started rolling out their new Vision suite. She dove into the logs like a surgeon into an open chest cavity, precise, merciless. Within minutes, she blinked and froze. There. On screen was a string of familiar syntax, a recursive loop I'd written 2 years ago, one I'd patched myself after Chloe flagged it in beta testing. They hadn't just stolen the structure, they'd reused the exact comments, even my shorthand for conditional overrides. That's bad for them, Rachel whispered. Like legally obliterating bad. Caleb gave a low whistle. They didn't even try to recompile this part. Just plugged it in raw. But that wasn't the kill shot. Not yet. I wanted more than plagiarism. I wanted conspiracy. I opened the archive of Richard's emails, decrypted and compiled through Caleb's fail-safe scripts. We weren't supposed to have them, but then Richard wasn't supposed to have betrayed his daughter. Most were corporate jargon and budget bickering until one thread caught my eye. Subject contingency planning, exec realignment, dated a full month before the board vote. I clicked it open. Daniel's prototype can be dressed up as independent, Richard had typed. If Maddie resists, we cite founder fatigue and transition authority cleanly. Chloe can coach Daniel on optics. My mouth went dry. They hadn't just reacted to performance or strategy. They had plotted my erasure. Clean. Quiet. Until now. Got something, Rachel called. She rotated her screen. An IP split agreement dated 2020. It clearly outlines that any neural architecture derived pre-Series B remains yours unless reassigned in writing. No reassignment found, I asked. Not even a typo. Naomi clicked her tongue. Then their new launch infringes. Clean and simple. She paused, then reached for a backup folder she'd been indexing. This is it. She opened a PDF, a notarized white paper signed by both of us dated 2021, filed under Creative Commons Attribution with a secondary timestamp on a public blockchain node. It detailed Phoenix's core logic language interpretation at scale and explicitly stated it had no overlap with Grant's IP. I leaned forward, stunned. "You filed that without telling me?" Naomi smiled. "You were too busy saving everyone else. I figured I'd save this." The wind howled outside as if punctuating the moment. Caleb closed his laptop slowly and looked at me. "This isn't just a comeback. This is justice." The cafe wasn't fancy. Exposed brick hanging Edison bulbs, indie playlists that looped too often, but for former Grant employees it was neutral ground. No badges, no boardrooms, just caffeine and quiet conversations. I didn't go inside. That wasn't the plan. Rachel had insisted I stay out of sight. Optics, she'd said, matter more when you let them wonder. So I waited across the street, earbuds in, but no music playing, watching through the rain-streaked window as she slid into a booth beside Sam Chen. Sam wasn't a journalist, not really. He was a blogger with a reputation for sniffing out tension in the startup world, the kind who turned hallway whispers into headlines. Rachel chose him because he wasn't big enough to scare legal teams, but just loud enough to ripple the waters. She handed him a USB drive like it was no big deal. Smiled, stirred her coffee. I knew what was on it. A clean, anonymized comparison between Grant's AI architecture and Phoenix's neural models, stripped of code but rich in implication. It wasn't illegal. Not yet. But it was sharp enough to cut. Caleb had crafted the technical graphics. Naomi had scrubbed the metadata. Every frame designed to do one thing: plant doubt. The blog post went up 3 hours later. No headline, just a title: Shadow Phoenix. Under it, a single line: "Sources suggest the real innovation might have flown the coop." And then came the side-by-side Grant spaghetti code model with bloated dependencies versus Phoenix's clean modular stack. Sam didn't draw conclusions he didn't have to. Anyone in tech could see it. The article began circulating inside Slack channels within minutes. Twitter threads popped up. Investors bookmarked it. Subreddits speculated. And somewhere on the 26th floor of Grant HQ, Daniel Grant read it twice. We knew because Rachel had eyes there. Old friends. People with grudges. One of them snapped a pic of Daniel pacing the hallway, phone in hand, jaw tight. Chloe, on the other hand, didn't pace. She exploded. The second message came from another contact, a former HR rep who'd turned recruiter. Chloe's tearing through IT logs, screaming about leaks. Of course she was. Because the article also included an anonymous quote, one we'd written carefully, strategically. "The real genius left last March. Now she's back, and she's not playing nice." It was a whisper. But a whisper in the right ear can be a scream. Daniel would recognize the phrasing. He'd know who it meant. And more importantly, so would Richard. Inside their perfect tower, glass began to crack. Chloe would check access logs. She'd hunt for IP addresses. But we'd routed the submission through layered proxies, encrypted, and rinsed through a VPN chain Naomi called digital dry cleaning. She wouldn't find Rachel. Not unless she guessed. And if she did, well, Rachel had already resigned. She was just a citizen now. A very clever, very dangerous one. Across the street, the lights in the cafe shifted. Rachel stood, smiled once at Sam, and left without ceremony. I slipped my phone from my pocket, refreshed the article, then glanced at her text. Live. Already trending. I leaned back against the bench as she approached the mist brushing her coat like static. They saw it, I asked. She smirked. They felt it. We walked without hurry, the city buzzing low around us. There was no press conference, no war cry, just a whisper where it would hurt the most. And as we crossed the street and vanished into the rain, I opened the article one last time, then whispered back to no one but myself. Time to let them sweat. Naomi stood behind the podium, chin lifted, voice steady. There was no hesitation in her hands as she clicked to the next slide. The room wasn't massive, maybe 80 seats, but everyone was filled. Investors, reporters, developers, all watching her, not me. And I'd never been prouder. The annual Cascade Tech Conference in Seattle had always been a battlefield of buzzwords and bravado, but this year Phoenix Intelligence had its own slot, our first public debut, and Naomi had insisted on being the face of it. Because they erased me, she'd said weeks ago, and I want them to see what survived. Now under the stage lights, her words cut clean through the murmurs. Our architecture, Naomi explained, is not built on legacy code. We started clean, containerized, encrypted, modular. We don't carry ghosts. I stood at the back, out of view, not hiding, just watching. This was Naomi's war to win, and she fought with poise only forged in betrayal. The Q&A came quickly. A Forbes reporter raised her hand. You were formerly at Grant Group, correct? What's it like? Building something that may soon compete with your previous employer? The air grew sharp still. Naomi smiled, but it wasn't a soft one. Some companies, she said, breed fear. We chose freedom. Silence. And then applause. The room shifted after that. Energy sharpened. I watched heads tilt, thumbs tap on phones. People were taking notes, whispering names. One by one, we were being remembered. Meanwhile, 500 miles away, Richard Grant paced inside his executive suite. We knew because Daniel called Chloe from the hallway. Rachel had her sources. The moment Naomi stepped off the stage, Richard had already summoned his son into an emergency meeting. Daniel had barely knocked before his father barked, "She's the mouthpiece now. You think that woman won't throw matches behind her?" Daniel had no answer. In Seattle, Naomi exited the stage to a small flood of business cards and handshakes. A VC from the Atherton Bridge Fund pulled her aside. The same fund that used to be a cornerstone investor in Grant's early days. "We followed your journey," the rep said. "Phoenix feels inevitable. Let's talk seed round." She nodded calmly. Later in private, she would cry. But not here. Not in this room full of suits who once called her invisible. Back in the hotel suite, I handed her a glass of water. She held it with both hands, knuckles white. "Richard tried to break me," she said quietly, staring into the distance. "Told me loyalty made me weak, that following you would end my career." I said nothing. I didn't need to. Naomi was already living the answer. That evening, I checked my phone. The headlines were small, but they were real. Phoenix debuts, security first AI stack, ex-Grant engineer leads the charge, former Grant devs comeback draws VC attention. But the headline that mattered most came from within Grant HQ. Rachel forwarded a Slack screenshot from one of her old contacts. "Daniel, what if she really outbuilt us, Richard? Then we bury her before she shows the world." I read it twice. Not because I feared it, but because it proved one thing. They were starting to sweat. And we were just getting started. When Richard wanted to hurt someone, he didn't raise his voice. He raised documents. It started with a leak, a suspiciously well-timed one. Forbes published a headline, "Phoenix AI built on breach." The article detailed allegations that Phoenix Intelligence Inc. had violated non-disclosure agreements from its founding team's time at Grant Group. A spokesperson for Grant had no comment, but the tone was unmistakable. The shots were fired. At first I laughed. The NDA was boilerplate signed when we were still dreaming in shared office space and ramen-fueled nights. But then Naomi called. They're dragging us in, she said, her voice low and clipped. We've been summoned. Caleb, too. Emergency hearing. Grant's legal team is claiming intellectual leakage. My chest tightened. They're going after the team. They want to freeze the next funding round. If the court grants a temporary injunction, we stall. Maybe collapse. I stared at the stack of reports in front of me, the Phoenix roadmap, the early adopters list, to the quiet buzz we'd cultivated under radar. All of it now at risk. We hadn't even launched yet, and the sky was already cracking. Within hours, my inbox was on fire. Investors backed out one after another. Some politely, some didn't even reply. I understood. Nobody wants to gamble on a scandal. Walker, our attorney, called next. We're drafting a response, he said. Always calm, always precise. But Grant's legal muscle is substantial. They're trying to squeeze you on optics. This isn't about winning in court. It's about making you look radioactive. Daniel hadn't called. Not a word. I imagined him sitting 2 floors below Richard, fidgeting with code he hadn't written, hiding behind silence like a shield. The worst came around 9 p.m. Bloomberg ran a feature titled "Phoenix Founded on Betrayal, Former CEO Breaks Trust, Breaks Away." They quoted unnamed insiders. They hinted at stolen prototypes, ungrateful heirs, and a daughter who forgot who gave her the keys. The knife wasn't just sharp, it was personal. Naomi stopped by the office around midnight. She looked exhausted, mascara smudged under her eyes, her blazer soaked from the October rain. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "They're framing it like I leaked things. I didn't." "I know," I said, brushing past her words. "You're not the enemy here. They just need someone to crucify." We sat in silence for a while. Caleb joined us via Zoom, face pale, his background a blur of blue code and red alerts. "They pulled some of my old commits from the Grant repo," he said, claiming Phoenix is a fork of their tech. "It's garbage, but they're making noise." Outside, the rain hit harder. The neon reflection of our logo blinked across the windows, flickering as if unsure it belonged there. Hours passed. Rachel had gone home. Naomi dozed off on the couch. Caleb logged off to prep for his hearing. I stayed. The office felt like a mausoleum. I sat in the middle of it, surrounded by blueprints, empty coffee cups, and dreams that now felt dangerously mortal. This wasn't how resurrection was supposed to feel. I should have known Richard wouldn't let me rise cleanly. He needed dirt on me, needed to convince the world I was as ruthless, as reckless as he feared I'd become. He hadn't just countered. He'd aimed for the spine. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight settle. Then my laptop pinged. Inbox 1, new message. Subject: re-counterfiling response from Walker Body. "You're not done yet. Check attachment number 3. It was still raining when I walked into Walker's office, but something about the light had changed. It wasn't brighter, just sharper. Like the sky was considering mercy. Walker didn't greet me with pleasantries. He slid a folder across the polished table, the edges already softened by midnight handling. "It's real," he said. I opened the folder. 1 page, scanned clean. Signed in black ink, the kind of ink that never fades. The header read, "Intellectual Property Transfer Agreement, 2019. At the bottom, Richard Grant's sweeping signature, next to mine. A line item glared up at me. 75% proprietary rights assigned to Madeline Grant on all foundational AI modules developed under Project Ignis, now Grant AI Platform." Walker tapped it once. "He signed away ownership before the platform even launched. You kept the tech running, yes. But this makes you the architect, the originator, the majority holder." Caleb leaned forward, blinking like he was afraid to hope. "This means we don't just defend," he whispered. "We go on the offensive." Naomi exhaled sharply. "It flips the narrative. From stolen tech to stolen throne." "And Daniel," I asked. Walker tilted his head. No mention of him here, and that's important. I didn't speak for a moment. My hands trembled just slightly as I slid the paper back into the folder. We don't publish it, I said. Caleb's head jerked. Wait, what? Not yet, I clarified. We don't leak it like they did with their garbage. We wait. Then we unveil it publicly, strategically, in the boardroom, with cameras. Naomi smiled. You want theater? I want clarity, I said. Let them underestimate me one last time. A soft ping broke the quiet. Walker checked his screen, then turned it toward me. For you. It was an email. Subject, I'm sorry. From Daniel Grant Body. I didn't know about the contract. I didn't know he went that far. I just wanted to believe in something. You built this. I see that now. If you ever speak to me again, please know I know who the genius is. And it wasn't ever him. I didn't respond. But I marked the email with a gold star. There was no time to cry, no time to reflect. That would come later, maybe. After the dust. After the reckoning. But in that moment, I felt something shift. The pressure didn't lift. It transformed. Naomi turned to me. So, when do we schedule the unveiling? I looked out the window. The rain had slowed to a mist. The city below gleamed like a circuit board blinking alive. Soon, I said, but not before I remind them why they feared me in the first place. The December wind was sharp as I stepped into the lobby of Grant Group's headquarters, a building I once knew by heart and now only recognized by ghosted memories. They hadn't changed the lighting, still cold and sterile like the smiles I'd grown up decoding at the dinner table. The guards glanced up startled but didn't stop me. I was still a shareholder. That sliver of legitimacy was enough to get me past the elevator and into the boardroom without a name badge. Rachel had already taken a seat near the back, her notepad open, pen poised. Naomi and Caleb waited outside with legal backup just out of sight. I didn't need them at my side today. Their presence was in the pages I carried. When I opened the door, heads turned. Richard paused mid-sentence, a glass of water suspended in his hand. Chloe tensed beside him. Daniel. He didn't look surprised, only tired. I walked calmly to the nearest chair and set my folder down. No one told me to leave. The air buzzed with the kind of discomfort that only comes when people realize their power might not be absolute. I believe I said, voice steady, that as a shareholder I am entitled to address the board. Richard stood. This is a private. You signed this, I interrupted, sliding the document across the table. In 2019. Before Daniel joined. Before the restructuring. Before you erased my title. The legal representative picked it up. I watched his expression change as his eyes scanned the lines. Maddie Grant, 75% ownership of the original AI architecture, dated, notarized, filed. This is a legitimate claim, he said, looking directly at Richard. If upheld, it could invalidate the current ownership structure of Grant AI's core product. The silence was instant and heavy. Richard's face reddened. She's misrepresenting what that document means. The lawyer cleared his throat. Sir, I suggest the board recess until we conduct a full review. If Ms. Grant's claims are accurate, continued use of the platform without proper licensing could constitute intellectual property infringement. Daniel shifted in his seat. He didn't look up. A murmur began to swell among the other board members. They weren't loyalists, they were investors. And investors don't like lawsuits or uncertainty or headlines that bleed. I built the engine, I said quietly, but with enough resonance to reach every corner of the room. You stole the wheels. But now I have the road. It wasn't about anger. Not anymore. This was design precise, deliberate, orchestrated. Every delay, every message unreturned, every meeting skipped by Richard had created the opening I now walked through with confidence. One of the directors raised a hand. I move, we suspend Richard Grant's executive privileges pending investigation. Effective immediately. Another seconded it. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it didn't have to be. Chloe turned sharply toward Richard. She just beat you with your own pen. I watched the storm unfold not from a boardroom but from my tiny apartment in Mission District, the same apartment where Phoenix had been reborn quietly, defiantly. My laptop was propped up on a stack of old notebooks. Caleb's voice buzzed faintly from the speaker. Naomi sat cross-legged on the floor, tapping furiously on her phone. The press conference at Grant Group had ended hours ago, but the aftershocks were only beginning. Every major outlet now ran with the same headline in slightly different fonts. Former CEO was the real founder all along. Forbes led with a pull quote. She didn't just build the platform. She was the platform. They embedded the clip of my speech in the boardroom, the one Rachel had discreetly recorded and passed along. In the video, I stood calm, composed, folder in hand, evidence undeniable. No theatrics, no vengeance, just facts that had waited too long for daylight. Within an hour, the video had gone viral. Hashtags sprouted like wildfire. Mach Phoenix rises. Maar she built. Una, the real Grant. Messages poured in from former engineers, analysts, even a few interns I'd barely known. Thank you. I left because of him too. They tried to erase me, but seeing you gave me my name back. I never expected it to feel like this. Not victory. Not even relief. Just silence after years of screaming into a void. A new ping lit up my inbox. Daniel. His email was short. I can't keep pretending. I've resigned. I'll speak publicly tomorrow, but tonight I want you to know I'm proud of what you've built. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. Naomi read it over my shoulder. He's stepping out of the shadow. He never liked the light anyway, I muttered, but I starred the email all the same. Meanwhile, the damage inside Grant Group was unraveling faster than we expected. Chloe had vanished from the press circuit. Her name trended briefly before the full letter dropped her resignation and a legal filing against Richard Grant citing coercion, manipulation of internal documents, and creating a hostile environment. I read the lines 3 times before letting myself believe them. Chloe, who once smiled at me like I was a child in a room full of men, had flipped. Then came the market. By midnight, Grant Group's stock had dropped 28%. Analysts on late-night segments speculated about class action suits. Investors scrambled. One even tweeted, "Pulled out of Grant. Backing Phoenix. The future has a new face." That was the moment it crystallized. Not the courtroom, not the signature, not even the applause, but that one message. The future had a new face. And it was mine. The apartment was quiet now. Caleb had signed off. Naomi had drifted to sleep on the couch. I sipped lukewarm tea and watched the ticker crawl across the screen. Red arrows next to Richard's empire. Rising green bars beside my name. Then my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach turn. Richard. I answered, letting the silence hang. His voice came through slower than I remembered. "Let's talk daughter to father." "Too late," I said. "Now I talk. You listen." The courtroom didn't smell like justice. It smelled like waxed wood, stale coffee, and too many lies baked under artificial light. I sat 2 rows behind the plaintiff's table, calm still. My folder remained closed. It didn't need to open anymore. The words had already been spoken years ago, sealed in emails, signatures, and contracts they thought no one would revisit. Richard took the stand, flanked by attorneys tailored in a navy suit. He probably thought made him look invincible. It didn't. He looked smaller now, thinner somehow, even though his voice tried to cling to its usual authority. But power doesn't live in a voice. It lives in truth. And his had finally run dry. The judge didn't rush. He let the case unfold with the gravity it deserved. Civil trial. Dispute over IP ownership, ethics, and corporate abuse. But no one in that room was confused. This wasn't just legal. It was personal. Chloe was called first. She walked with the kind of poise I hadn't seen in her before. Not performative, purposeful. Her heels didn't click, they struck. The entire gallery leaned forward when she reached the witness stand. "Please describe this email, Ms. Langford." The screen lit up. There it was. From R. Grant to C. Langford subject resource attribution, erase her version. Reformat the logs. When it's ours, it stays ours. Gasps weren't loud, but they didn't have to be. The line did all the screaming. "Do you believe this was in reference to Ms. Maddie Grant's original source code?" "I don't believe it," Chloe said. "I know it." She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. I nodded anyway. Richard's attorney objected. Overruled. Chloe stepped down. Daniel entered next, not as a witness but as an observer. His presence wasn't required. He came anyway. When Richard looked to him for backup, for solidarity, for something, Daniel didn't nod. He didn't even blink. That silence echoed louder than any testimony. The judge leaned forward. "Given the presented documentation and testimonies, this court recommends an immediate preliminary investigation into criminal misconduct related to corporate fraud and ethical violations." Murmurs rippled across the gallery. I didn't move. He continued, "Until further notice, Mr. Richard Grant's executive authority within Grant Group shall be suspended pending board review." It wasn't an explosion, it was an exhale, the final gasp of an empire that thought it could outlive accountability. The attorneys began packing up. Richard remained seated, frozen. For once, no words. Outside, cameras flashed, microphones jutted toward me, voices colliding. What happens now? Will Phoenix absorb Grant? Will you press charges? But one question rose above the rest, clear, direct. What will you do now? I stopped, turned, looked them all in the eye. Build. Always build. The walls were still bare, but they didn't echo the way they used to. Maybe it was the people. Maybe it was the silence, not heavy, not tense, but full, whole. The kind of silence that comes after you've screamed all your truth and there's nothing more to prove. We'd sold the Phoenix lease that morning. The company was moving into a real headquarters, 5 floors, glass walls view of the bay. But tonight, for one last time, we sat in the apartment that had carried our ghosts. Naomi leaned against the kitchen counter, her shoes kicked off. Sipping tea she claimed was too bitter but wouldn't stop drinking. Caleb sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, but untouched fingers tapping idly on the edge. The whiteboard had been erased clean, save for a single post-it that just said, version 2.0. I had meant to remove it. I didn't. The laughter that filled the room wasn't wild. It was the kind that crept in sideways, slipping through the cracks between memories and bruises. We didn't talk about court filings or stocks. We talked about ramen hacks, broken keyboards, that one client who thought machine learning meant downloading Wikipedia. No fireworks, just air finally light enough to breathe. A knock at the door interrupted the rhythm. I opened it to find Daniel. He didn't speak, just held out his hand, palm open, fingers curled around a single item. The old Grant office keycard. My name still etched on the front. I took it. Not because I needed it, but because I understood. He looked around the apartment like it was a relic, like it meant something now, like he wished he had seen it sooner. Still no apology. None needed. "Be well," he said, almost a whisper. "You too." When he left, the air didn't shift. It settled. Naomi broke the pause, her eyes scanning the room before locking on me. "You know, she said, you never wanted to destroy Grant. You just didn't want to be erased." "Did I destroy it anyway?" I asked. She shook her head. Phoenix didn't rise to burn anything down. It rose because it had somewhere to go. Caleb added, "Somewhere better." Rachel's face flickered on the screen across the room, a video call we hadn't yet closed. She gave a sleepy grin, wrapped in a blanket half a world away, on a well-earned break. Remind me again. She said why we worked 80-hour weeks for 2 years. Everyone laughed. I stood up, walked to the whiteboard, grabbed the marker. The smell of ink was familiar grounding. I wrote slowly, deliberately. Phoenix 2.0. Augmented Ethics Core. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't for investors. It was ours. Caleb tilted his head, reading the words. Not going for a quieter life, huh? I looked at him. At all of them. My war wasn't over, but it had changed shape. Clarity wasn't stillness. It was direction. What's next, he asked. Legacy. The spotlight was gentler than I remembered. Maybe because for the first time in years I wasn't stepping into it to defend myself, I was simply arriving. The auditorium at TechNext buzzed with the quiet murmur of innovation, rows of venture capitalists, startup founders, and developers with laptops warm on their knees. It smelled like caffeine and dry-cleaned ambition. Naomi adjusted the mic at the side stage, whispered, "You ready?" I nodded. My heart didn't pound this time, it pulsed. The MC introduced me as founder and CEO of Phoenix Intelligence. Not former grant executive, not controversial whistleblower. Just what I built, who I chose to become. I walked to center stage. Technology I began was never supposed to be a weapon, nor a shield. It was meant to be a tool, and sometimes a mirror. I scanned the room. Most faces I didn't recognize. A few I did. Rachel near the back, arms crossed, smiling. Naomi leaning against the wall, relaxed, like we hadn't just clawed our way back from oblivion. And in the third row near the end of the aisle, Daniel. He didn't wave, didn't even nod. But he looked at me without shame. That was enough. I was told once, I continued, that women don't need to prove themselves, that we should know when to stop. Soft laughter in the audience. I stopped once. It nearly erased me. My voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It settled into the marrow of the room. Technology doesn't replace people, but it does unmask them. It reveals who leads and who hides behind titles they didn't earn. No applause yet, just silence. The good kind, the kind that wraps around truth like velvet. I smiled, stepped back. So here we are, rebuilding not just systems but the way we value vision, no matter whose name is on the door. Then the applause came, not explosive, but rising in waves, catching like fire from one side of the hall to the other. I exhaled. Backstage, a young woman with a notebook approached me. Barely 20, wide eyes. "You're the reason I didn't quit after my third pitch rejection," she said. "Can I email you?" "Yes." "And no, you're not bothering me. That's what we do now. We don't climb alone." Later I sat in the quiet green room, the noise of the convention muffled by velvet curtains. Naomi was outside coordinating with press. The day had been long but clean. No hidden traps, no ambushes, just light. I opened my laptop. A headline blinked across the screen. The Phoenix didn't just rise, she rewrote the sky. Forbes. I stared at it, not because I needed validation, but because 2 years ago I had feared I'd vanish without a sentence to my name. My inbox pinged. Subject: acquisition offer, 150 million body. We'd like to acquire Phoenix. Are you interested? I didn't answer right away. I closed the laptop, looked out the window where sunlight finally pierced through a long stretch of clouds. Legacy, I thought. And then I smiled. They thought they buried me under silence and strategy, but I was only growing roots. The courtroom didn't roar and the headlines didn't scream, but the truth landed where it always should, in the light. Justice doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it walks in quietly, holding documents no one bothered to read. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but when it does, it reverberates through generations. If you've ever had your voice stolen or your worth dismissed, remember, standing up once may mean you never have to bow again. Like, share, and subscribe if this story spoke to you. Comment 1 if you felt seen. Comment 2 if you wanted more.